At 200 miles per hour down the Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans, the brake discs of the early Ford GT40 didn't just get hot, they glowed white-hot at 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, boiling the hydraulic fluid into vapor, melting the wheel hubs, and leaving the pilot staring at a solid brick wall at the end of the track with absolutely zero brakes. In 1964 and 1965, the Ford Motor Company poured millions of dollars into beating Enzo Ferrari at the world's most dangerous endurance race. Detroit's top corporate engineers built giant engines, heavier chassis, and thicker steel brakes. Yet every single year, their multi-million-dollar race cars crumpled into flaming wrecks or blew their engines on the French tarmac, while Ferrari's lightweight red sports cars glided effortlessly to victory. Then came Carroll Shelby. Shelby was a tall, plain-spoken Texan, a chicken farmer turned racing legend, and a man who had actually won Le Mans himself before a dangerous heart condition forced him to stop racing. When Henry Ford II handed Shelby the failing GT40 program in sheer desperation, Shelby didn't look at the car like an engineer sitting in a quiet office in Dearborn, Michigan. He looked at it through the blood, sweat, and terror of a driver sitting behind the wheel at 3 in the morning in the pouring rain. Carroll Shelby saw a radical, counterintuitive truth about endurance racing that the corporate elite at Ford had completely missed. He realized that Le Mans was not a race of speed, it was a brutal game of mechanical survival, where the team that changed the rules of physics during the pit stops would destroy the team that relied on brute strength. So, what did Carroll Shelby see that made the Ford GT40 beat Ferrari at Le Mans? He realized that instead of building a brake system that tried to survive 24 hours of punishment, he had to invent a way to swap the entire braking system in under 90 seconds mid-race without breaking the rules. To understand why Ford was failing so miserably before Shelby took over, you first have to understand the terrifying physical monster that is the 24 hours of Le Mans. Le Mans is not a modern Formula One track with paved runoff areas and gentle curves. In the 1960s, it was a terrifying 13-kilometer circuit composed mostly of narrow, public French country roads. The crown jewel of the track was the infamous Mulsanne Straight, a 3-mile-long, dead-flat stretch of asphalt bordered by massive oak trees and wooden fences. Drivers sat in flimsy aluminum cockpits, strapped inches above 50 gallons of explosive aviation fuel, holding the throttle flat out for nearly a minute at a time. The cars reached velocities over 210 miles per hour, faster than a commercial airliner taking off. At the very end of that long straight lay the Mulsanne corner, a sharp, right-angle turn that required drivers to slam on the brakes, dumping over 200 miles per hour of kinetic energy in a matter of seconds. When Ford's executive engineers originally built the GT40 in England, they engineered the car using computer simulations and indoor laboratory testing. They designed a sleek, beautiful machine with a powerful engine. But computer models in Michigan could not simulate the horrific reality of thermal accumulation. When a 2,000-pound car slams on its brakes at 200 miles per hour, kinetic energy is converted instantly into pure, raw heat. The brake rotors absorb that heat. On a normal racetrack, the brakes have time to cool down between turns. But at Le Mans, after screaming down the Mulsanne Straight, the brakes absorbed so much thermal energy so fast that the metal had no physical time to dissipate the heat. Lap after lap, the heat built up inside the wheels. The brake pads crystallized. The brake fluid boiled inside the lines, creating gas bubbles that made the brake pedal go completely soft. Drivers would press the pedal all the way to the floorboard and feel nothing. The cars shot off the road, crashing into trees or spinning out of control into sand traps. Ford's corporate response to this crisis was typical of a giant car company: make everything bigger. They designed larger brake rotors, added heavier metal calipers, and installed massive air ducts to force air over the wheels. It was a catastrophic failure. The heavier brake systems added rotating mass to the wheels, making the car sluggish in the turns. Worse yet, the extra air ducts created massive aerodynamic drag on the Mulsanne Straight, dropping the car's top speed by nearly 10 miles per hour. While Ford was fighting its own weight, Enzo Ferrari was laughing. Ferrari understood that his cars didn't need giant, heavy engines or massive iron brakes. Ferrari built lightweight, agile racing machines that conserved their brakes, glided through corners, and preserved their mechanical components through the long, dark cold of the night. When the Ford GT40 prototypes crashed out of Le Mans in 1964, failing to finish a single car, Henry Ford II was furious. He had been publicly humiliated by a boutique Italian automaker. He handed the entire GT40 program over to Carroll Shelby's small workshop in Venice, California, with a simple, ruthless command: win. When the GT40 sets arrived at Shelby's shop, his team of hot rodders and mechanics, led by brilliant driver and engineer Ken Miles, didn't start by building a bigger engine. They pushed the car into a wind tunnel and stared at its aerodynamic profile. Shelby saw what Ford's computer models had missed. The car was literally fighting the air. At high speeds, air was getting trapped under the front nose of the car, creating lift and making the steering wheel go terrifyingly light at 200 miles per hour. The drag was forcing the engine to work twice as hard, creating extreme internal temperatures that exploded the transmission gears. Ken Miles and Shelby sculpted the nose of the GT40, reshaping the air scoops, taping yarn to the body panels to track air currents, and creating a slippery shape that cut through the atmosphere like an arrow. They replaced the complex, fragile European engine with a massive iron block 427 cubic inch Ford V8, a heavy, low-revving American muscle engine that produced overwhelming torque. Now the GT40 had the aerodynamic stability to reach 230 miles per hour, and the raw V8 horsepower to leave Ferrari behind on the straights. But Shelby knew a terrifying truth that he kept hidden from the Ford executives. The faster the car went on the straights, the faster it destroyed its own brakes. By making the GT40 hit 230 miles per hour, Shelby had made the braking crisis twice as deadly. During test runs at Willow Springs and Daytona, Ken Miles reported that the brake rotors were cracking into pieces under the intense thermal shock. The iron was heating up to 1,500 degrees in seconds, then cooling down, causing the metal to expand and contract until it literally shattered like glass. No brake rotor on Earth existed that could survive 24 hours of that level of violence. The corporate engineers at Ford told Shelby that the laws of metallurgy made the problem impossible to solve. They claimed no metal alloy could absorb that much energy for 24 continuous hours without cracking. And that is when Carroll Shelby had his stroke of pure genius. Shelby looked at the official Le Mans rulebook and asked a question that no engineer in the history of racing had ever thought to ask. Does the rulebook explicitly state that you have to use the same set of brake calipers and rotors for the entire 24 hours? He read the fine print, line by line. The rules stated that you could not change major components like the engine block or the chassis frame during the race, but there was no rule banning the replacement of the brake assemblies, because everyone assumed changing a race car's brakes took 45 minutes in a garage, which would instantly lose you the race anyway. Shelby called Phil Remington, his chief mechanic, a legendary fabrication genius who could fix anything with a blowtorch and a hammer. Shelby told Remington, "I don't care about making a brake rotor that lasts 24 hours. I want you to build a quick change system that lets us swap out white-hot brake rotors and pads in 60 seconds during a routine pit stop." Phil Remington went to work in secrecy. He engineered a custom quick-release brake system using special quick-disconnect hydraulic lines and spring-loaded pins. Instead of forcing a mechanic to unscrew microscopic bolts and bleed hydraulic lines with wrenches while hot oil burned their hands, Remington made the entire brake caliper and rotor assembly pop off the wheel hub as a single unit. A mechanic could now grab a pair of insulated asbestos gloves, pull a single pin, slide the glowing, ruined 1,500-degree brake assembly off the car, slap a freezing cold, fresh brake assembly onto the hub, lock the pin, and send the car roaring back out onto the track in under 90 seconds. It was an unbelievable mechanical sleight of hand. While Ferrari was forcing its drivers to pump their brakes gently, save their pads, and drive at 80% capacity to make their components survive until Sunday morning, Shelby's drivers had a green light to drive like hell. Shelby told Ken Miles and Bruce McLaren, "Drive the car as hard as it will go. Slam on the brakes at the last possible yard before the turn. Don't worry about saving the brakes. We will give you new ones while you drink a cup of water in the pits." On June 18, 1966, at the start of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the weather turned dismal. Rain lashed the track, making visibility near zero. The Ferraris and the fleet of black and blue Ford GT40s roared across the starting line. From the very first hours, the pace set by Shelby's drivers was ruthless. Ken Miles pushed his black GT40 to its absolute mechanical limits, braking late at the end of the Mulsanne straight, terrifying the Italian drivers as he blew past them into the turns. As night fell over the French countryside, the brutal mechanical attrition began. One by one, the privateer entries and smaller cars began to break down. The temperature dropped, and thermal shock began shattering the components of the factory Ferraris. Every few hours, Shelby's GT40s pulled into the pits for fuel and fresh tires. While the crowd watched the fuel hoses, Shelby's mechanics casually reached into the wheel wells with heavy, heat-resistant gloves, pulled the quick-release pins, dropped the smoking, warped brake assemblies onto the concrete floor, and snapped brand-new brakes into place. The Italian team officials from Ferrari stared across the pit lane in absolute horror and disbelief. They watched as Ford did in 90 seconds what normally took nearly an hour. They realized instantly that their entire race strategy was doomed. Ferrari's lightweight cars, built on the assumption that everyone had to conserve their equipment, were being forced to run at a qualifying pace just to stay on the same lap as the American monsters. Under the relentless, crushing pressure applied by Shelby's tactics, the Ferrari engines began to blow up, one by one, under the strain. By Sunday morning, not a single factory Ferrari was left running at the front of the field. The Ford GT40s weren't just winning, they were dominating the entire track. As the 24 hours drew to a close on Sunday afternoon, June 19, 1966, the world witnessed an unforgettable sight. 3 black, blue, and red Ford GT40s swept around the final curve at Le Mans, flying side by side in a formation finish across the line, capturing first, second, and third place. It was the first time in history an American manufacturer had ever won the overall crown at Le Mans, ending Ferrari's 6-year reign of dominance in a single, devastating afternoon. Consider what would have happened if Carroll Shelby had listened to the traditional corporate engineers in Dearborn. If Ford had continued down the path of building heavier brakes, thicker rotors, and larger cooling ducts, their cars would have continued to overheat, crash, and explode in flames along the Mulsanne Straight. Henry Ford II would have eventually canceled the program, buried under hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, and humiliated by the European racing establishment. Carroll Shelby won because he saw beyond the physical limits of the machine. The corporate engineers looked at Le Mans and saw a test of how much punishment metal could endure. Carroll Shelby looked at Le Mans and saw a test of how quickly human beings could adapt when metal inevitably failed. He proved that when you are facing an impossible physical barrier, you don't beat nature by building a stronger cage. You beat it by changing the game entirely while your enemy is still playing by the old rules.